Welcome back to the Ken Matthews Report. My pleasure to have Jay Dyer on. Jay is an author, comedian, TV presenter, known for his deep analysis of Hollywood, geopolitics, culture. I see your graduate work focused on psychological warfare, which I'm totally into. Every parent is. And film, and I see you're the author of two books, of course. We have them both here. I finished the first. I'm starting the second. Uh,
That's
Esoteric
that's old.
Hollywood.
There's a third book now, so I need to
Oh, there
update
is.
that. Yeah, I got
Nice.
a big fat philosophy book that's out. So
Cool. You're co-creator and co-host of the television show Hollywood Decoded. You've been featured on numerous popular shows and podcasts. Yeah, I've seen you all over the interweb system. And you've debated with some of the top debaters, and I those are pretty interesting too, because there's a
yeah, we've
lot
had a
of
lot of
up
Muslim
there.
debates in the last 5 years. That
I
was a
would
new
imagine.
new domain to step into there with Islam. I grew up doing a lot of debates because I was in the philosophy club and debate club and all that in college. So I have a long history of debate, but had some friends that were really into debating with Muslims, and they kind of got me into that in about 2018. So that's been an interesting trek. I didn't really
Mhm.
know, much about Islam. So
So you deep dive on Muslim, and what are some of the things you debate? Are you debating the tenets of various religions or belief systems or Americanism? What are you debating?
well, it started with when I got into more of the geopolitical stuff back in undergrad. I was reading some of the texts that dealt with understanding 9/11, understanding Islamic
Mm,
worldviews, and so forth. So I was looking at Islam at that time from a geopolitical perspective, and I got really interested in the history of British intelligence and their tendency to work with various Islamic radical sects and tribes going all the way back to Philby Senior and to T.E. Lawrence and people like that. So I read a lot of books on the Muslim Brotherhood,
hmm.
historically speaking. So I didn't really have an interest in Islamic theology, but about 2018, I had some friends that were debating Muslim theology, the Quran, and so forth,
Right.
what it claims, and so I just moved into that and got pretty interested in. I'm not at all an Islamic expert. There's a lot more to Islam than people think. Getting into it, it's a pretty dense subject matter because they have not just the Quran, but they have all these hadiths, which is
Oh
all
yeah.
these sort of oral traditions and so forth that they
Right.
try to suss out. So yeah, so we started with the interest in the geopolitical stuff, and then I got more and more into debating it from an Orthodox Christian perspective and opposing Muslims from that vantage point.
Well, regarding your book, again, I can't say enough good things about it because Jay and I were talking earlier. My audience knows this. I'm a bookaholic. I'm a readaholic, and I get gifts from my audience, my subscribers, all the time. Just check this book out. Check this book out. Check this book out. And I have this thing where if I give someone a book and they don't read it, I get ticked off. I don't know about you, but if I take the time to buy a book for my son or my neighbor, and then 2 years later, it's all dusty. And hey, did you ever read that book I gave you about whatever, Hollywood or Biden? And no, I didn't have time. I was busy being brainwashed, whatever.
Yeah,
Uh, but this is so good. I find, even though this is what this is probably 7 or 8 years old, isn't it? This one?
2016, I think
Yeah,
that
okay.
came out. Yeah.
So the reason I like it is because it's so relevant to where we are today with all um, this pre-programming, you know, that we're doing with Hollywood.
Yeah, sort of conditioning
Yeah,
and right. Sometimes people call it predictive programming,
yes,
which is kind of
predictive
just kind of
programming.
kind of warming people up to where they want to take us through, through fiction.
And the stuff I found most fascinating in here, and then for the audience, we'll get out of the book, but I just wanted to mention that if you're this is your cup of tea, guys, uh, this whole juxtapositioning of H.G. Wells and 1984 Huxley and Orwell, uh, all these different people had a different spin, but they were all trying to set the stage for something very unpleasant for us all. And you can't help but wonder, as you have mentioned before, and we know this, the government is so in bed with Hollywood and publishing and news and information. And that's, I think, two things happen. We get dumbed down we get normalized to whatever it may be, fake aliens, fake vaccine, fake virus, whatever. So tell us a little bit about your background, how you ended up being, I mean, this is an interesting job you have. You tie in comedy. Is that because you're a smartass like I am? Or I mean,
Yes, I
okay,
was a class clown in high
okay,
school, so I won the superlative of class clown. So I was always joking around, and back in high school, I was known for impressions. So I would always impersonate the teachers, and everybody thought that was funny. And
cool.
it's just something I've always had with me. I did do a little stand up when I was 18, 19, just experimenting with it. I decided that's not the route I wanted to go at that time. So I
Right.
went to college for, at first it was religious studies, and then I switched over to philosophy. But when I was at undergrad, I was really interested in a lot of what I was seeing on the internet with regard to documentaries coming out that were kind of questioning 9/11, questioning,
Hmm.
big events. And so I started reading more and more about the history of secret societies, the history of espionage in the United States. And I just really fell in love with those subjects. And so I took film classes at the same time. Um, and I was noticing that while I had these multiple various interests, they were all kind of tying together unexpectedly because I had one class called, I think it was called Hollywood History. And we did a deep dive into all of Oliver Stone's films, basically a whole semester on Oliver Stone. And so
Yeah.
I was comparing what Stone had in the films to, our best record of the history in these various cases, even films, obscure ones like Nixon. Most people don't think about Oliver Stone and his Nixon. Everybody thinks of JFK and so forth. But
Right.
so I got deeper into JFK stuff at that time, and was really noticing that there's a pattern, not just of conspiracy, but maybe there's more going on with how fiction portrays historical events, and there might be an agenda behind some of those portrayals. Now, I'm not saying that necessarily Oliver Stone himself has worked for the government. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying
Right.
that I was encountering some of the academic literature talking about films used as propaganda. And, I was in my 20s at the time, 24, 25, and I'd never heard this. I thought that, I grew up as a movie buff, loving
Hmm.
Martin Scorsese movies, loving, Richard Donner movies. And I remember watching Mel Gibson's conspiracy theory back when it came out in the 1990s. I thought it was fun, but then I started thinking, well, what if there's actually something that's true in there? Maybe Mel Gibson's character isn't just a satire,
Right.
maybe he's actually talking about some true things. So I went deeper into that subject matter of the relationship between the intelligence agencies, the Pentagon, and Hollywood. And I think in the 2000s, at that point, I was only able to find maybe 2 or 3 books. There was Operation Hollywood, which is a collection of essays on the Pentagon, basically telling studios at times what they want in there for,
Right.
pro-war propaganda, something like that. And there was another book that Tricia Jenkins had put out, CIA in Hollywood, from University of Texas Press. And those were okay. They were good, kind of introductory sort of overviews. But I got really fascinated with this, and I want to know the history of it. Like, who
Yeah.
came up with this idea of, hey, let's use the studios, and and I think that it really, the earliest days of the camera, the pretty quick, pretty pretty soon after the invention of the camera, people figured out that this would be great for propaganda. We got to use
Oh
this.
yeah.
And that's what happened. You got, even from the earliest days of the studios when they're set up,
Well,
they were
World
used.
War One, World War
Exactly.
One, and uh, what is the movie that just came out and well, not just came out a couple years ago. I forget the name about Hollywood at the turn of the
Babylon.
yes. Did you see it?
I did. Yeah,
I
actually,
thought I thought it
actually liked
was
it.
I liked it as well. I thought it was brilliant. And I think that's one of the few, in my opinion, that's one of the few mainstream films. Because if you look at the
Yeah.
actors and the actresses in it, I mean, it was real. I just thought it was tight. It was over the top. It was
Mhm.
dark,
Yeah.
very dark, but it's one of the few. I mean, if you look at Eyes Wide Shut and some of the other ones, but
Right.
Babylon was one of the few that really went deep and dark about, hey, you're going to go to Hollywood, you're going to get chewed up and spit out because
Yes.
Hollywood is not about entertainment. It's about moving people's opinion. It's about getting people to do what we need them to do. Maybe one week it's buy this kind of soap, or maybe next week it's
Yeah.
bomb the living hell out of Afghanistan.
Yeah.
That's why they're there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's well said. I mean, I think that's the essence of the great thing about that movie was one of the points of the movie is what people think Hollywood is and why they come here. That's actually a movie. like your
Yes.
idea of it is that it's going to be like a movie, and I'll move there. And what we
Yeah.
find is just like in Babylon, other films as well. I think David Lynch's Mulholland Drive kind of has this theme too,
Oh
where
yeah.
the Naomi Watts character, she wins some contest and she moves to Hollywood. She thinks she's going to be the next, Ava Gardner or whatever, and she
Hmm.
ends up a crack whore, and that's part of the point of that film, right? So again, very, very perceptive. I totally agree with what you said there, and really, yeah, that's the point here. But what we think of Hollywood it's a fiction. It's not what it is. What it is this machine, and it's not just a machine that's based around greed and wealth. It's actually based around, like you said, other things too, like propaganda and perhaps even darker, more nefarious agendas. And so, yeah, that scene with Toby, I think it's Toby Maguire when they go into the underground. I think that was
Oh
very
God.
symbolic at the end, where it's like, oh,
Oof.
what's really going on in Hollywood is like these
Yeah.
underground, like midget alligator death parties that are going on. It's like, well, I don't know what this is, but it looks terrible. Like Ozzy Osbourne underneath the city eating rats with midgets and stuff. Anyway, so yeah, I thought Babylon was great, and this speaks to this classic attachment between Hollywood and Babylon, right? The ancient empire of Babylon.
Yes.
This is why, of course, the prominent occultist Kenneth Anger, when he wrote his book Hollywood Babylon, he's calling it Babylon
Hmm.
on purpose. And I think it's kind of it's had that connection for a long time, and that's I kind of see my books as like better, hopefully better versions of Hollywood Babylon
I
than what
would I would agree
Kenneth
because I've
Anger.
read that as well. I find yours very well researched, and uh I like I said, because of what's happening today and because of our lives, I'm a little older than you, probably a lot. Um I don't know how old are you, but
16, just hit my sweet 16.
yeah, I just went through puberty. I'm 21, so I'm a little bit older than you are. But I didn't mean to put you on the spot like
No, I
that.
don't care.
I am fully clothed, by the way.
I do have shorts on, so sometimes I'm in my boxers when I'm on an interview. But
But I started, I got my degrees in political science and communications, probably two of the most useless degrees there
hey,
are.
well, you know what? Philosophy is close
Yeah,
third
and
there.
all those degrees you can use as placemats at a diner.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
You don't know how
uh,
many times I heard the joke, like, are the philosophy companies hiring?
it is funny though. It is
Yeah.
funny, and the irony is, so I came from a conservative family, blue collar. Both my parents had businesses. I grew up in construction, and ironically, my mother had an art gallery. My dad was in painting and construction. So I had a very well-rounded. Went to North Carolina State. Was studied pre-law for 1 year. I realized that most lawyers are whores. Not all of them, but most are, and some are actually crack whores, as you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Not even in Hollywood. Then I decided, I'll keep political science and media. I fell in love with radio. I did just a brief stint in radio, 40 years, and
Wow.
and ended up guest hosting for Rush Limbaugh the last 4 years of his life. And I've just had some very interesting exposure to, I did cable television for 15, 20 years. And the thing I kept seeing was nobody's following the Constitution.
Hmm.
People that claim to be churches are not following the Bible.
Hmm.
People that claim to be documentarians are BSers. This
Yeah.
is a pattern I started to see. Even in college, I
Yeah.
started to see this pattern. And and then I just became an information junkie. I started reading heavily also like you in my youth, but now more than ever, our ignorance is it's strangling us. I mean, so many people are so
Yeah.
far behind, and many are not, they're not behind because they're bad people, they're busy. And media knows this. So when we look toward the news, action news at 6, everything you need to know, 22 minutes with fake traffic, fake weather, and a bullet points from Washington. So now it's like, will we ever catch up? Will people ever figure out, yes, Project Mockingbird, Blue Jay, real, MK Ultra, real, poisoning our own troops, poisoning populations, all real.
Yeah.
Everything that many of us were talking about 3 years ago
Yeah.
during COVID has happened repeatedly in America and around the world. But because there's a lot of people that don't have the passion or the time, maybe they're busy building trucks, or they're truckers, or they're physicists, or working on something else. I'm just trying to figure out, how do we get our country back? Do we get it back? Or is it going to be forever changed because of all the misinformation? The misinformation is so overwhelming. You
Mhm.
go into a
Yeah.
library, especially a high school library today, and the censorship is just abhorrent, you know?
Yeah, I went to my university not too long ago, and I spent quite a bit of time down in the basement of the library. As I was a research assistant down there when I was in
But not
grad
the
school.
deep, deep basement, just the like,
Not the underground base where
not
the
the sub basement.
where
Okay.
the midget Aussies are eating
The
the hotel
alligator.
rats.
Remember the
Yeah, right.
alligator?
The alligator.
God almighty.
No, I remember we had a great reference section down there, and we had vast sections on the history of economics, espionage, religious theological treatises down there. I would spend many days down there, and now going back there about 10 years later, very recently, they basically purged everything except a small section, I kid you not, of Marxist works. So the public school, or the university I attended, basically got rid of all of their it's a wealth of knowledge down there, and
Yeah.
it's all purged down to a small section of Marxist stuff. So I
That's
don't think
pretty
that's by
terrifying.
accident. Yeah.
That's terrifying when it's like you no longer can read Hobbes or Descartes and compare it to Marx, Lenin. Well, look at Mein Kampf. That's one of the greatest examples of, you can't even find it anymore. And when you do, it's a censored version, because the governments, including our own, they still censor Mein Kampf. Why? I don't understand that. We know he was an evil dude. Let's read why he was so evil.
Yeah, there was uh, even at the time that I was doing undergrad and grad school, it was kind of understood that you needed access to those things. You know what I mean, to study them from an academic perspective.
Hmm.
So we wanted to be able to read all of the dictators. We wanted to be able to read Mao, anybody who.
Yeah.
But now it's sort of like, again, it's all been sort of whittled down to just a small amount of information that they want you to have from specific, probably Frankfurt School Marxists, more or less,
Right.
the Western CIA version of Marxism. And I think that's by design, because they have assumed and assessed that they're at the point now where education is it's 100% total brainwashing. Now, in my view, public schooling was always intended to be that. If you go back and read Horace Mann and John Dewey, they actually said that the purpose long term of the public schooling system would be the socialization
Yep.
of the child, not the education. So, not learning to become a critical thinker, but actually shutting down critical thinking and turning you into a cog for the machine. They actually say that. That's
They
their.
come out and say that compliance is necessary
Yes.
as you transition from childhood to adulthood. That's where compliance is critical, because what we don't want is a bunch of adults running around saying,
Yeah.
I'm not taking this shot and I'm not supporting Ukraine.
Exactly. Yeah, you can't have critical thinking, and so they had to figure out all the various techniques to shut that down. I just did the fourth hour of Alex a couple Fridays back, and I was honing
Alex
in on
Jones, for people that don't know.
yeah, I was honing in on that section in Bertrand Russell's classic text, Impact of Science on Society, where he says that in the dystopia, we will be able to tell the public that snow is black, 2 + 2 is 5, and anybody who questions it or thinks otherwise will be considered a fringe weirdo. And
Yes.
he says that will be the strength and power of our social engineering. It will be so effective by that point that we'll be able to do that. And that's where we are. People
Oh,
can
yeah.
say,
Well, you call it
I'm a woman. I'm a woman right now.
right.
Right.
Scientism is just that. You
Yes.
combine that scientism with elitism, and if you train people to just believe experts and
Mm-hmm.
believe scientists, it doesn't matter what they say, because they're already trained.
Yeah.
Look, there's Obama. He's wearing a lab coat doing an Obamacare commercial. He must be medically knowledgeable.
Look,
Everybody
Ken,
else is
Ken,
in
I
a
don't,
lab.
I don't know what you're trying to say, Ken, but look, my wife, Mike. Mike's a beautiful woman. Okay, come on, Ken. Let's be fair. And so, Ken, I think you nailed it right there, because Obama is a great example of that gaslighting. I mean, there was a situation where you had people. Remember a few years ago, Rachel Dolezal was saying that she was black.
Yes, the
So
white freckled girl with the red hair.
and everybody sort of made a big fuss about this. How dare you try to say that you're? But then men can say that they're women. Women can say
Yeah.
that they're
And
men.
don't forget about Rachel. She actually was in charge of a regional NAACP
Yeah. Now
facility.
we've
Yeah,
we've
that
seen
is his.
several of these.
Yeah, that's the other thing. That's what?
And that's the weird thing, is that so you can't use your basic critical thinking skills for these kinds of things. And I think even Bertrand Russell or Huxley, they would have been surprised at the ability to say, well, men are women and women are men, right? I mean, I think that would have even they would have thought, well, surely not that far.
I
We
would say that if you do go back, if you were to go back, and I know you'd love to go back and meet some of these authors, and if you said that, they would think we're crazy. But we've been in a state of that for like 20 years. For 20 years, like I often talk about my late grandfather who fought the Japanese in the Pacific, Guadalcanal, etc. And I often think, I said, he's not spinning in his grave. He's like, he can't even
It's like
grasp.
Tasmania, Taz.
Yeah, he can't even grasp. Like first it was open borders,
Yeah,
different restrooms, um, the just the whole concept of our military engaging in a mission with no ammo. Like you can be at the border and the guns are kind of scary, but don't no none in the chamber, none in the gun. Like being overrun. Watching that was heartbreaking last week at El Paso. Watching the National Guard with all their kit, except what they needed, just being overrun by the invaders. And if we said this to somebody 20 or 30 years ago, they would have been, that's not going to happen. So the fact that a Supreme Court justice says, I'm not a biologist, I can't tell you what a woman is. We're so far beyond. I mean, we
yeah,
have gone beyond your book. We're
yeah. No,
already
exactly.
we already believe everything we see in the movies,
Yeah.
the commercial. People still believe Joe Biden.
Yeah, it's gotten way crazier than when so a lot of those essays I was writing in the 2000s and the 2010s, and they are already dated now because we're into the dystopia. I mean, the dystopia has
Yeah.
rolled out. The coof, as I call it, that was actually a big phase of the rolling out of the dystopia. I think. I mean, obviously, this is a sort of a slow kill Fabian socialist model where they roll it out really slow,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes they'll roll out a big thing that kind of speeds it up. And of course, gay marriage was a big part of this, the push for
Yep.
that. And then for me in my mind, when Bruce Jenner was Woman of the Year, and I think 2016, for
Yep.
me that was like a huge. It seems like things got even crazier after that, because then all the trans stuff exploded.
Yep.
But they needed that seminal event of a major media outlet proclaiming a man as the Woman of the Year. I mean, that for me was like full on. Okay, we flipped into, we can tell them 2 + 2 is 5 now. They'll believe it.
Oh yeah, because you've taken like you illustrated so great in your first book about when you compare Huxley and George Orwell. When you look at Orwell's kind of like it's going to be dystopian, it's going to be dark. There's
Right.
going to be like flat painted armor vehicles coming in the night and
Yeah.
grabbing you. And then Huxley, Brave New World is there's going to be AI, there's going to be messaging everywhere,
Yeah.
and you'll just willingly do it. You'll willingly. So what I think is happening to the world is they've combined the two. So we have the worst of both worlds. So
Absolutely.
if Jay and Ken don't willingly say that man's a woman, uh, we'll just put him in prison if he doesn't.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's a great point, because 1984 has the hard, strong-handed heavy, it's supposed to be kind of Stalinist.
Oh yeah, it's dark and gray and prison
yeah, and everybody's smoking like generic Victory cigarettes and Victory gin. There's only one brand and it's really shitty. So
do
then
you
you've got
can I interrupt for a second? Do you follow Greg Reese?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's in Moscow now, right? You knew that, right?
He messaged me about going to Russia. I didn't know if he
No,
was
he
back or.
moved to Moscow.
Oh, I didn't know. No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he's been there for 2 months and he's doing his podcast and everything.
Oh wow.
He lives in
I thought he
Moscow.
just meant he was visiting. I didn't know he
No,
moved.
I thought the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Huh.
And
Wow.
for people who don't know, Greg is one of the journalists and host on Alex Jones, and Jay is on Alex Jones. And a lot of people have a love-hate relationship with Alex Jones, but then a lot of people have a love-hate relationship with the truth. It's kind of like, I'm really uncomfortable with this guy, or I'm uncomfortable with that human trafficking truth, so I'm just going to block it out. Well, whatever. Anyway,
Unbelievable, folks. We have stacks and stacks of news. Unbelievable. Yeah. Yeah. So the funny thing about that
frogs are gay. Frogs are gay.
I've listened to Alex since 2003. He was a big part of getting me interested in a lot of these more esoteric topics in relation to espionage. I remember the first thing I saw from Alex in 2003 was a clip of him talking about how the CIA and OSS recruited out of Skull and Bones, and I was like,
yes,
what's the Skull and Bones things? I got to see it. So
yeah.
I went and read Sutton's book on Skull and Bones. And that was a big key turning point. So I've always been an Alex fan for many, many years. And what's funny about the way media works, you probably know this, you're a veteran of media, but like you can get 95% of things right.
Yep.
Be spot on with all of your calls. And then if you get one thing wrong, that's forever going to supposedly they're going to use that to try to destroy you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you get one thing wrong, get one detail wrong, you're the worst person in the world, even though you've called 95% of things, spot on. So,
and he's very well researched. I mean, that guy's absolutely a readaholic.
Yeah.
And, and again, this is going to, I'm sure some people are being triggered. So if you're a middle-aged white woke man and you're being triggered, just hug yourself. Hug yourself.
It's a safe space. Make it a safe space.
Or if you can find a biological woman that wants to hug you in your triggered state. But
or just say you're a woman for a minute and then hug yourself.
Exactly. Just date yourself if you have to.
Date yourself for a minute.
calm down, because for example, I remember hearing all the people trashing Alex's book, and I think of all the books he's written, this is his best. It is. You could take this book. We mentioned this before the show for people watching. You could take that book, and I bought that book the day it came out, and I read it, and I reviewed it, and so many people have read it and like had their kids read it. Because if you take Alex Jones off the cover, it's just it's written like a great historian's book.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no hype, and it's all factual. Do you think Alex Jones is going to risk writing a book at this point in his career where anything is wrong in it?
Yeah, right.
You think he's going to risk 38 billion more dollars? That's the funniest thing. The people that have been labeled as extremist or podcasters or alt journalist, like we would be, citizen journalist, alt journalist. We go to greater lengths because I don't have an NBC News announcer behind me. I don't have marketing and credible and digital stuff. If I'm a liar, I'm done.
Yeah.
Someone just goes, this guy's a liar. I'm not paying for him. He's an idiot. I'm not reading that book. But if you're telling the truth, you're going to keep getting out there. But it's truly a battle.
We have a higher standard that we put ourselves under a higher standard because we're competing against that. That's actually our strongest weapon, right? The whole system is based around concocting and maintaining completely flimsy narratives. Mm-hmm. So they have a lot more work to do. It takes all of that money, all of that deception, all of that mass media glitz and glam to prop up what are basically lies. So we have a advantage in that we don't even have to do all of that. We can just keep hammering at the truth. Right. And that gets us much further than them. That's why, the mainstream media is dying. The legacy media, mm-hmm. ratings are down. They can't get viewership and they just keep doubling down. And so it's really, they're eventually going to have to figure out that they're going to have to cave to the truth some to even get any viewers at all. So I'm kind of surprised that they haven't brought on some, better pundits, but it's so locked down, and they're so they're
Well,
so into the
globalists,
lies that they just have to, they always double down. They don't fudge at
yeah,
all.
the leftists in particular, they never know when to stop. So like you say to them, look, you can't have a 6'4" sweaty guy with his junk hanging out in a skirt telling fourth graders at the library, this is not a normal thing. It's
Right.
grooming. If I did that at the park, I'd be in cuffs. You can't do that. So rather than them saying, "Oh, maybe we overextended a little bit. We're out in front of our skis. Let's pull back." No, they're
No.
like, "Screw you.
Yeah,
If
we'll
you
go
don't
to the
want to
next
buy
level.
into this, we'll destroy you." And it's like, wow, you guys are making a mistake because what's happening now is most people believe 2020 was stolen because
Mm-hmm.
so much fact is coming out.
Mm-hmm.
Most people believe Jan 6 false flag.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The whole world knows that the Whitmer kidnapping thing was
Was
now
staged.
fake.
Yeah.
So it's like you guys were so busy trying to say penis equals vagina, that all the other stuff you do on a regular basis, like steal votes, rig the stock market, sink the dollar, now we're like, this seems very normal now. I think you are doing this stuff because you keep saying that my daughter should compete against the boy because he's wearing a girl's swimsuit. Now I'm starting to believe, and
Exactly.
I think that's why people are flocking to Trump now. I mean, Trump has
Yeah.
the most diverse base ever. You
Yeah,
know.
it's crazy, and I think you nailed it there because I noticed even in a lot of people I know with family members that were still kind of hanging on to elements of the system. Once they went after everybody's kids, and once the coof happened and the lockdowns, that woke up a lot of people, right? I mean, a lot of people were like, "Wait a minute, they actually want to chop off junk of my kids,"
Hmm.
right? And they're like, "It's that crazy." And hey, maybe those conspiracy theorists were right. You know what I mean? Like I put up a
Oh yeah,
meme. I put up a meme yesterday, and it was basically just a list of like 15 things that the journalists were saying versus what the conspiracy theorists were
I
saying, and
know.
everything that the conspiracy theorists were saying was absolutely spot on. So yeah, I think anybody that has a memory too that's not restricted to the last 2 weeks. I remember, and I was never a Democrat, but I remember back in the 2000s, even in the 90s and the 2000s, it was a Democrat talking point to have a border.
Yes.
They were all about this, always talking about it. I remember clips of Bill Clinton. We've got to have that border. We got
Yeah.
to that. We got to shut. We got to close that border. And that was because of they pandering. I mean,
Oh yeah.
claiming to care about the workers. They didn't want the wages to be driven down. They want to have a damage to their working class base. It's bizarre that now that's flipped
Oh
to
yeah.
how you've got Biden up there. There's no problem with the border. It's just open. I mean, this to me, this is crazy, and it's actually obvious. Like, this is a strategy to actually destroy the country. Like,
Oh yeah. Well, no,
people are,
yeah, it is. It's an invasion. That's what it is by definition. It's an
well,
invasion.
people think they still, and a lot of the conservatives are still stuck in this mindset of, well, it's incompetence. The government's run, but no, it's not
No.
incompetence. It makes perfect sense if this is a strategy. Okay, that's a better
Oh yeah.
explanation, has explanatory power, whereas everything being just total government incompetence, that's not, that to me, that doesn't make sense. But if I
I
look
think
at it as a
that's the
strategy,
I
yeah,
think that's the hardest narrative to
yeah,
process, or the hardest truth. And I want to ask you dig deeper into some of this truth stuff. But to me, the hardest truth is most of what happens is intentional. It's not coincidence. And when something horrible happens, chances are there were people on the inside helping it to happen, whether it's the fentanyl coming over the border because
yeah,
so many people are getting a cut of that,
mm-hmm,
or the child trafficking, which again, what did the blowhard GOP establishment tell us at the beginning of the year?
yeah,
We're gonna expose the January 6 tapes. No, you're not. You haven't.
right,
We're gonna find out. We're gonna show you who was on the Epstein list. No, you haven't. We're gonna make sure we never have another stolen election. No, this one's gonna be the worst
right,
because you're now making it illegal to call out people that steal the election. So it's to me, it's the hardest thing when you mention because people are so programmed to say, "Oh, you're not one of those. You're not one of those Alex Jones.
Yeah.
You're not. Oh, Ken, I thought better of you. Are you a conspiracy theorist? You really think that Big Pharma wants
Yeah.
to put a needle in every arm and make a $78 billion profit?" Yes, I do.
Yeah. Yeah. So many of the things that people were saying back in the 80s and 90s that were very small in number, John Birch Society type people, they were really way ahead of their time. I don't think they got everything right. They got some things wrong, but the overall ideas of what they were saying back in the day, they were borne out vindicated. What Alex
Mhm.
started saying in the 90s and the 2000s has been borne out vindicated. And everybody was always, the essence of what was being said was that there is a shadow national security state secret government
Mhm.
that's kind of in the open. It's not secret in the sense of like nobody knows who's running this. No, we know who the CFR is. We know who the Trilateral Commission is,
Right?
but they're not publicly the ones like telling everybody on the news what we're going to do as foreign policy. They're telling the politicians what to do, and the
Right.
politicians then play this game. And so I don't know if you saw that New York Times thing the other day, which was completely ridiculous. Their video explaining what the deep state is. And the
Oh yeah,
title of
yeah.
it, oh, this is so funny, right? The title of the video is like, there is a deep state, and actually it's pretty awesome. And then they go and they explain the deep state, and it's like a Trekkie nerd, right? This boomer who's a Trekkie nerd
Yep, yep.
who's like Space Force. And then there's this other woman who's a bureaucrat who's like going after, I don't know, the tap water to fix the tap water, and she does Pilates. And so it's like, oh look, it's just harmless bureaucrats. It's fat office women. That's the deep state. No, the deep state is always, everybody's been saying since Peter Dale Scott coined that term, that it's a national security breakaway shadow government. That's the deep
Mhm.
state, not fat bureaucrats in offices,
And
right?
it's not people that run the local grocery store. It's people
Right.
that can send a team to your home to arrest you, Roger Stone, or
Yeah.
whatever. The deep state is um, smart, powerful, elite people that
Yes.
know as long as they control the storyline, they're going to get more power, more wealth,
Yeah.
and that crosses. I always say the one time that Democrats and Republicans get along is when their power or wealth is threatened. Then they're buddies. Then they're bipartisan. They're high
Absolutely.
fiving. They're elbow bumping. Mike Pence is a great example of that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I've
So
got a great. I
go
got a
ahead.
good. I just came across this book. Looking at, we were talking earlier about footnotes, and I found a great footnote of this really obscure former British intelligence guy
Hmm.
who wrote a book. His name's James Rushbridger. It's called The Intelligence Game,
Oh,
and
nice.
it's a great book. What he says in here is, he says, "Look, I was working in British Secret Service for many years." He wrote this, I think, in 1989. So this was prior to a lot of events, big the Big Nine event, so forth. And
Well,
he says
right before the Soviet Union collapsed.
exactly. He says
Yep.
this is something that's been so borne out, and I've heard a lot of really perceptive analysts say this. Patrick Henningsen has said this. Alex has said this. He says in the first chapter, he says, if you want to understand the intelligence game, he says a lot of the major intelligence failures are actually the biggest successes for the intelligence agencies. He says, because all that does is allow the deep state to say, oh, sorry, we messed up. We let the towers come down. Let's get a few more billion in funding, and we'll do
Oh
much
yeah.
better next time. And also let us surveil everything. So he was calling that out in the 1980s. And by the way, I think the story is, I don't know if this is the case, but he wrote a book about Pearl Harbor being a false flag, and Mr. Rushbridger wasn't alive much longer after that.
Well,
So,
that doesn't surprise me at all. We just had that Boeing whistleblower, and that's
yep,
the other part of you can always tell, Jay, who reads history and who does their research. Because when you say something like you just said, I wasn't like, oh, come on. They don't kill authors. They're not going to keep, they're not going to keep WikiLeaks dude, Julian Assange, locked up for 10 years until
well,
he's
if they're
sick.
whistleblowers, that's a higher tier, right?
Oh, yeah, they're
You
dead then.
Yeah, me or you, we're just kind of goofballs on the internet. We're talking,
Yeah.
and we're on the media, we're pundits. But if you're a person who's a whistleblower, that's a lot more,
Well, if you start moving the needle, because I look at like Cheryl Atkinson. She really
Mm-hmm.
moved the needle at CBS
Yeah,
with Fast and Furious. And the
great point.
Obama administration reached out, as they always did, and said, "You better stop that." And they do it. And they were going to frame her husband with porn, online porn. She said that in front of Congress. You look at Catherine Herridge, most just recently fired from CBS, right? She was
Yeah.
at Fox. She went to CBS. And then they took all her stuff on J6, and then they gave it back to her 5 days later. So the closer you get to the truth, I think that's where you become a target. And I have one of my shirts says, "Tell the truth, become a target." It has a big like scope target on it, and that's the truth. It is. When you if once you start, someone picks it up and goes, "Holy crap! How does this guy finding this stuff out? Where is he learning this? Is he going to be a problem? Is this Boeing whistleblower?" By the way, the CEO of Boeing resigned yesterday. Did you see that?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I think it's something about the doors just being sucked off the aircraft in flight that really gives Boeing, unfortunately.
And the whistleblower being dead like
Yeah, the whistleblower being dead.
a few days later.
I mean, that would have been a dream story for them if he actually got sucked out of the plane, but he didn't. I'm
Yeah,
sure.
it's just it's so weird to be, ironically going back to the beginning of the conversation. Now I feel like we do live in a movie. You know what I mean? It's like we're
Yes,
in this weird dystopian
it's the
story that
true. It is the Truman Show.
it's like an art house film. We live in this weird art house film that's a dystopia, and like,
Yes, and just
there's
weird.
this
Yeah, craziness.
there's a book called The Wanting Seed. Burgess, who wrote Clockwork Orange, he wrote another dystopia that few people know about called Wanting Seed. And in that dystopia, I kid you not, it's a mandatory gay dystopia. So everyone has to be gay in the future. He's
Hmm.
probably playing on the fact that in Brave New World, Huxley had everybody you have to have mandatory intimacy. So if there are people coming up to you and say, "Ken, I'm in the mood today. I want intimacy," you must oblige in the Brave New World dystopia. So I'm
Wow,
guessing that
perfect world for the Biden family, though.
exactly
I
right.
mean, think about it.
So I mean, people think about Eyes Wide Shut, and then it's like, what if the whole society is a giant Eyes Wide Shut? But you have to have intimacy with everybody,
Oh,
right?
wow,
No,
wow.
other things too that I didn't notice until recently reviewing Brave New World is that there's also a pedo element to Brave New World that I missed the first time I read it
Hmm.
many years ago. The world socialist controller Mustafa Mond, he's pictured at the end of chapter 2 or 3 as a kind of a Christ-like figure, where he says, he even cites, "Let the children come unto me," from the
Mm,
Gospels.
okay.
But the context is that he's talking about the playtime that they have, the intimacy that they have.
Wow.
Yeah. So Huxley was actually saying, you're not just going to have a sexual revolution type of future, which, by the way, he wrote that 30 years before the 60s
Which is
counterculture.
amazing. I mean, when you think about his intellect, I mean, go ahead. I mean, that's
Well,
amazing.
he's also saying it's going to be a sexually, like, everything goes.
No
Pedo.
boundaries,
Exactly.
none.
Exactly.
And that's the other thing. When you when you read some of the CIA documentation and stuff, and there's so much stuff out there written by FBI people and CIA people and people that were MK Ultra, and there's so much cross-referencing available. That's the thing that drives me crazy. It's not like it's a one-off. There's just like one book that Jay wrote, and Alex wrote a book, and Huxley wrote a book. One book, that's it. That's all you have to go on, Ken. No, I've got 13 books on COVID-19. I started getting the books and doing the research in the spring of 2020. I started building this library of the audio and the documentation of all these doctors that have now come out repeatedly,
Mm.
um, including the latest documentary, which is brilliant, which is free. It's on Vimeo. But and it's not a one-off. Like I forget the guy's name, the Satanist who he used to work at the Presidio. He was in
Michael
intelligence.
Aquino.
Thank you. See, I knew you would know that. But I mean, he's not one off. There's a whole bunch of Satanists in the military
Yeah.
today,
Mm-hmm.
and we facilitate them the same way we facilitate, the lieutenant or whatever his rank is in the Air Force. that's a guy in
Yeah.
drag. And he goes around and he gives speeches about how we need to be more sensitive as a military.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. Like back in the Cold War, if you think about the Cambridge spy ring, they were all compromised and blackmailed because they were gay, right?
Yep.
And I was thinking, like, well, I guess the one advantage of all of the military establishment, brass being trans, is that they can't be blackmailed. Like
You know
they're
that
totally degenerate. How can you can't blackmail somebody? They're totally degenerate, right? So that's the only advantage of that. But no, I think it's crazy. It's intended, in my view, it's an intended demoralization to have those kinds of things going on, right? So when
yeah.
we look at, our supposed leaders and they're complete buffoons, like, Biden or these military brass and so forth, being wearing, costumes. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just a demoralizing thing. So it's a to me, it's a psyop. And you were mentioning earlier various programs. MK Ultra is a classic. MK Ultra is the ultimate, like, studying the inner world to master the mind, I think, for the purpose of mass
Right.
formation, psychosis type stuff, to apply it to the collective. Um, but you can actually read the MK Ultra doctors' books. They're still out there. People
Oh
don't
yeah.
know, but Dr. Jose Delgado's Physical Control of the Mind, you can still buy that book on Amazon. You can buy the writings of Dr. John C. Lilly, the freak who had a crush on dolphins and would put, LSD in the dolphins' food. He would put
Hmm.
chips in the dolphins' brains. I mean, guys, mad science basically, but he's well known.
And
MK
it's
can be,
interesting because what you bring up now is what so many of these puppets protest. They're going to show up and say, don't kill the beef. We shouldn't be eating beef. Don't kill the beef. Don't kill the
and they're
squirrel.
working for the people who are, like, basically,
Right.
putting chips in the dolphins' brains.
Or
Exactly.
or or they would bring over in Operation Paperclip. They brought
Yeah.
over all these Nazis, and what did the Americans say? Well, we're going to change your name and we'll put you up. Don't worry. But hey, how did you figure out how you know uh,
Yes.
jet pilots can drink salt water? Well, here's how we did it. Well, they can't, but we killed a lot of people. We learned the hard way, but we did find this out that you can hang a guy upside down in the freezer and he'll
Yeah.
last 2.5 hours longer. How'd you find that out? Well, we had a bunch of people to experiment on. You want to see the results?
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
no one even talks about that. They're busy saying you and I are misgendering somebody.
Yeah.
And to get to this point, so many people had to be tortured. I mean, I definitely want to have you on again, mental note in the future, because there's so much to talk about, like the whole HIV thing, you know, the whole all this stuff that had so much of the government's fingerprints on it. When you think about that, how poorly some of it worked out, and then you go back and realize they recycle the same
It
people,
was
like
yeah. I just
Fauci.
watched a mini documentary on that the other day. Who's the woman? Her name escapes me, but it wasn't actually Fauci that was running all of this. Fauci was.
Burks,
That's it.
Burks, yeah,
Yes. And
Dr.
but her
Burks.
and Fauci come from the old AIDS
Yes.
propaganda.
Yeah,
Exactly.
they were right in the middle of that. They were right in the middle. And you can find bootleg videos either on TikTok or Rumble. You can find videos where people were confronting Fauci
Yeah.
about the AIDS thing.
Yes.
There were parents showing up and saying, "You killed my son. He didn't even need that.
Yeah.
He could have went to South America or whatever and gotten whatever that day's ivermectin was, right? Because what did they do? When people said, "Oh, I think I know what's happening here," whether they were in the Congo or South America, "I think I know what's happening. We can treat this with this and this." And it was the government that said, "No, you need to take what was the AIDS thing? AZT or
Yeah. Yeah. That
you need to
weird
take
drug
this,
that
just like
kills people. Yeah.
you need to take remdesivir.
Mm-hmm.
That's the protocol, and that's the only way we're going to get rich. You need to be ventilated. I don't need to be ventilated. I'm breathing fine. No, you're not.
Yeah. Exactly.
You know?
Yeah, that's, even though Fauci is not quote MK Ultra, it's basically the same type of mad science approach that the MK Ultra doctors were engaged in, which, as you pointed out, it's a perfect mirror of what you see Mengele and these other,
Yes.
Nazi scientists engaged in. They had a very eugenics based view, so they didn't see any problem with experimenting on humans. And so that same model is moved or accepted as well, as you pointed out, with paperclip, where they didn't just want some of the bad guys to come over. They actually wanted access to their findings, their
Oh yeah.
research, as well as a lot of people don't know this. You probably do, but uh, this ties it into the Ukraine. A lot of people don't know that when the OSS took over Galen's network, Galen org, that's Reinhard Galen. They
Mm-hmm.
wanted his whole spy network throughout Europe because he was a very capable spy handler, spy chief. So they gave him a deal. They said, "We'll let you have some freedom, but we want all of your spy network and your trained cells and operatives." This is partly why there is still a pro-Western funding and support for the neo-Nazis in the Ukraine that goes back to Galen's network.
Now, didn't he train people in Canada as well?
Yeah.
That's what I thought. He trained. I don't know if he was on the super soldier thing, but he trained people in like this really radical, unorthodox combat. And to
Yeah,
this
there's
day, a lot of that
Ian
has evolved.
Ian Fleming was involved in some of that too, where they
Yes.
would train people. It's called the X Brigade or something like that, like the X-22 or something like that. So yeah, they were experimenting because the British coordination office of black ops was working with the OPC, which was the OSS's coordination of black ops. I mean, it's British intelligence that set up the OSS. I mean, they came over here and
Right.
told
Yep.
us how to do it. So they're all, yeah, we're all working together. So when they took over that network, they wanted to utilize all these different, experiments that the Nazis had engaged in. Absolutely.
I mean that you look at the time limit, and for people watching now, you know why I'm a fan of Jay's, but you also know why we love history so much, because it's not only all connected, but I look at you look at that period in America immediately after World War II into the mid 50s, and you look at the transitional pieces of history and how the chessboard totally got upended. I mean, the chessboard in 1945, after Germany surrenders, after I forget the Japanese leader's name, but after he surrendered, and then all of a sudden the chessboard changes, and the most unlikely partnerships start, and the most horrific people and there were already some, but I tend to believe that early in the development of our country, it wasn't as bad until people got a taste of global power. And then when they started sitting down with this leader and that dictator and this terrorist, they thought, wow, I can control that whole continent? You mean I could be a billionaire forever? Yeah, all you got to do is sell out your people.
Yeah. By the way, I remember too. It's T Force. That was the 30 Assault Unit. Was, yeah, Ian Fleming's brigade, and it wasn't X Force. I was thinking of the stupid comic book, but it was T Force was his
Mhm.
experimental special ops thing. But yeah, I think the dictators are interesting because when we read Sutton and Quigley, we find out that a lot of these dictators are actually propped up by the West,
Yes.
and they have funding and support from the West. And that was because the power elite saw an opening to have two world wars, according to Quigley, that would exhaust and deplete the two rivals of the Western power bloc. So by having those
Hmm.
two world wars, and this explains, if you read Quigley in that middle, there's a middle chapter where he talks about the appeasement program, and he talks about, I think he says $2 billion given, I think, from the Bank of England to Hitler secretly. So
And
there's a
for people that don't know, that we're talking about
yeah.
this guy.
So there's a chapter called the appeasement plan, and there's a section where it talks about the $2 billion given to Hitler when the British government was publicly opposing Hitler,
Hmm.
but the Bank of England secretly was still funding what he was doing, and they were saying, "Hey, when you go into Poland, we won't oppose you. Go ahead."
And that was horrific. As
And
someone, my ancestors are Polish and Hungarian, so
yeah,
I was like, "Are you kidding me?"
yeah,
And um, Tom Clancy kind of fulfilled that role of Ian Fleming in the next generation,
that's a great point. Yeah.
the next iteration of, in particular, submarine technology, surveillance, space technology. I mean, look at the books, and many people think he was involved in, consulting type
Yeah,
stuff.
I think that's pretty well borne out. A lot of these spy writers do have a, not everybody obviously, but a lot of them have a background in some kind of intelligence or
Mm-hmm.
military intelligence work, and then they take those stories and put it into fiction. That goes back to actually, this was kind of what I wrote my some of my grad work on, was the history of British intelligence using fiction originally perhaps as ways to just tell their stories, but also as ways to do propaganda. So it's
Well, yeah,
really,
you mentioned it went back as far as like the 1800s in the case of the Brits.
you could find, I mean, I don't know. I mean, you could argue that maybe, you've got people like John Dee who are spies back under Elizabeth. He's the first 007, Dr. John Dee, the occultist. But yeah, I think in terms of British spy fiction, we see this with Joseph Conrad. We see this with Graham Greene, where they're basically kind of putting their stories into fiction. But I think what happens is that eventually it really becomes more useful as propaganda. So I'm not sure exactly what date it would be. I mean, there's no
Mm-hmm.
like hard line as to here's the point where it becomes propaganda, but
Right.
that's because at the same time as the British spy fiction writers were putting out their stories, you had H.G. Wells basically as kind of the Bernays before Bernays. He was writing fiction as propaganda knowingly. So perhaps maybe Wells is the first version of this, and he's realizing as he works with things like Wellington House, which is the predecessor to Tavistock, he's realizing that fiction is a lot more effective for
Oh, yes.
propaganda for the
Yep.
masses than the fact media is. So that's why War of the Worlds, everybody knows War of the Worlds,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
But nobody knows H.G. Wells's two New World Order books, right? He's
Yeah,
got two
which
books.
right, yeah, those will knock you right on your butt. When you hear the way H.G. Wells thinks about you
Yeah.
and about God and about Christianity and about freedom, you're going to be pissed.
Yeah,
He's not a big fan.
yeah, he believes that the future technocratic government will be able to create a fake religion that's
Yep.
really just a front for the technocratic establishment. So it'll be whatever kind of religion, basically mixes all of the world's population into one belief, some kind of syncretist new age thing. Who knows? But that seems to be what he talks about, because he has a really obscure book called God the Invisible King that you know about. I think he wrote it in the early 1920, 1918, somewhere in there. But
Mhm.
that's his thesis on religion. And he says that you might think I'm an atheist because I'm such a committed Marxist. And he says, I'm not. He says, I believe in a future Luciferian type of government and order. So he admits he's a Luciferian. He doesn't say that he believes in an actual entity, but he kind of sees it as a Promethean thing where man worships himself. So
Mhm.
perhaps he thinks of Prometheus as this symbolic figure, or Lucifer as
That's
a,
that whole of what is it, God of John or God of whatever, that Oprah was involved with that guy,
oh,
where
John of God. That was
John of
part of
God, yeah.
it. Yeah,
Um, I'm not dyslexic. I just had it backwards.
yeah. It's okay.
But this that Lucifer, Satan, Baal and all that, the focus is on you,
Yeah,
how great you are. You
exactly.
don't need Jesus. You don't need a God. There's no one
Yeah.
greater than you. And that whole self-help
Yes.
kind of shtick, I think one of the reasons it appeals to dictators and, as George Bush would say, evil doers, terrorists. Um,
Yeah.
I think it appeals to them because there's no moral code to it. So
Yeah.
there is no, well, you would never do that to a woman. You would never do that to a baby. You would never do that to hardworking people. Being worshiping Lucifer is the ultimate ends justifies the means.
Great point. It's
Because everything
relativistic.
Satan does is
Yeah.
doesn't matter if you have to cut someone's head off or rape this woman to get her to comply. It justifies your greatness, you know?
Here's what I think the key to that is. I learned this back when I was studying, how statism works, back when I was undergrad. I think that what this does is it's the worship of the self, worship of Lucifer. Ultimately, that is a relativistic, subjectivist view. So, in other words, there's nothing that I'm bound by. Ultimately, I'm my own arbiter of everything. And the reason that the state or the system really likes that, you might think, well, why would the state want me believing that I'm my own God? because what that does is it puts you into a mode of being a slave to your passions. So what actually happens is that you're now a slave to base desires the more that you feed into that self-worship mode of
Mhm.
thinking. And that makes you perfectly pliable putty for the state. That's why the state always pushes these kinds of, I mean, if you go back to the Roman Empire, right, you can worship any gods you want, just as long as you acknowledge also Caesar as God.
Mhm.
So in the same way, statism wants you to worship yourself, and that ultimately means you're going to be worshiping your base passions. But the state will guarantee your pleasure dome
Mhm.
living as long as you then submit to the state in that, so that you can be ruled by your passion. That's the key to it right there.
And the irony is the people, the detractors of Christianity, and they attack Christianity. I was just thinking of so many places in the Bible it says to be a good steward of the earth, to be a good citizen. Pay your taxes. If you're Roman, pay your taxes. Obey the laws. Be a good citizen. And the exact opposite is socialism and communism. They're like anything goes, just do what we say when we say it. And then it's a free for all. And I think that's why the left can recruit so many people, because they feel if I'm not judged and I'm not held to any standard.
Yeah.
I mean, this Obama guy, this Biden guy is awesome. He's a Catholic that's pro-abortion,
Yeah.
pro-gay marriage. That's like the ultimate Catholic.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great, yeah. I think the leftist mindset is ultimately totally ironically a contradiction. And if you think about 1984, it actually points this out where it talks about doublethink, because everything that the establishment is telling you is the direct opposite of what actually is the case, but people keep believing it because they think, or they're controlled basically by this faith that they have in the system. And so if you
Mhm.
remember, in the most important chapter is when O'Brien is having that debate about philosophy with Winston, and he says, look, Winston, the point of what we're doing as the party is that you believe from your heart that the party makes reality. Because if you'll believe that, then I have you as he says something like you're perfectly controlled or brainwashed. He's like, you're perfect at that point. And he says, I don't want you to just say that 2 + 2 = 5 because you think that's what I want to hear. I want you to say it because you actually believe that the party can make 2 + 2 be 5. And so that is a submission to the fact that there's no truth higher than the state or the corporate
Mhm.
state, whatever. It's pure relativism. And so if they can get the individual to believe pure relativism, then they will believe that the state can dictate the 2 + 2 is 5. And
Well,
so
you
that's,
mentioned at the very beginning, you brought up the version of 2 + 2 = 5 equals 5. We're there now
yeah,
with
exactly.
man
That's
and
what
women.
Russell said. Yeah. Bertrand Russell said that would be where we'd be. Yeah.
Yeah. And that is where we are now. So incorporating that into wrapping things up, some predictions, if you will. What do you think about an election? Do you think it's going to happen? Do you think it's going to be fair? Or do you think caca hits the fan?
Yeah, great question. I think we've got basically multiple options that a deck of cards they could throw down. Multiple options they could throw down an economic crisis. They could throw down riots, race riots, these kinds of things stirred up like we saw back at Ferguson. That
Yep.
could be a good type of a strategy. We could have something to do with the border, the illegals crisis there, some kind of something that's kicked off with all of the people that have come in. Maybe they've been trained or told what to do in a certain
Right.
situation. We could have, like you said, something with Russia that postpones the elections. Maybe events happen and, oh, we've got to postpone the election because of. So I think all of these are very real possibilities. We could have, they might throw another curveball with COVID part 2. I mean, nobody in 2020 was expecting COVID, right? That came. We
Right.
see
Right.
we see in March. Oh, there's these videos of something weird happening in China. Ha ha. Hope it never happens here. And then boom, we're in this total dystopia madness situation that
Right.
nobody expected. So, and we saw Bill Gates, Tedros. They've been saying get ready for COVID too,
Yeah, I know.
right?
That's
Disease
terrifying.
X.
Yep.
They say Tedros said at Davos, right, or the other World Government Summit, he said COVID was disease X part one, and there will be disease X part two. So nobody's really, we keep forgetting about every time, not saying you, but people in general, every time
Yeah.
there's a big new event, we start thinking, oh, that's the thing, right? So now that we've had the Russia attack,
Mhm.
now, oh, World War III is going to be the thing that, but they like to throw these curveballs. So
Right.
I'm spitballing here, but I still kind of think they might try to do, some kind of disease X part two. They were really talking that up.
I know the cancer is getting a lot of attention now because of Kate Middleton
Yes.
and King Charles, and the spike in young cancer. I just saw a big article on it. I did it on my show today. They're calling it turbo cancer among young,
Yes.
healthy people. Where is
Right.
it coming from? But you're not allowed to say in the same segment, these people have been vaccinated.
Also took the
Probably,
vaccine. Yeah, exactly.
probably, right? So
Absolutely.
it's crazy. Now, I want to talk about, this is out of left field. Your wife, are you and her on the same page ideologically, or does she think, oh my God, he's reading another book? Stop.
No, she's got two books of her own along
Wow.
the same lines. In fact, that's how we met, was on a podcast talking about critiquing Hollywood. So she does a
Wow.
podcast as well on YouTube. So her name's Jamie Hanshaw. And the only reason she's not Jamie, she is Jamie Dyer, but because she was already kind of doing
Yeah, yeah,
podcasts.
branding, get it. I get it.
Yeah, we didn't. Yeah. So she's out there doing the same stuff too. You can get her books at my site as well.
I don't think you're a woke, compliant man.
No, not at all.
Do you have her books you want to plug while you're here? Or?
I don't have a copy, but if you go to my website, jaysanalysis.com, in
Yep.
the shop, you'll see her books there as well. And
Yeah,
they're
we're
very
gonna put
similar to
that
my books.
we're gonna put that link on there. So I would strongly recommend your books, obviously. And the beauty about this is who hasn't seen movies? Who
Yeah.
doesn't like movies? I mean, really, when you think about some of the defining movies and the defining moments in our culture, like you said, it's always been art. Yeah, like E.T.'s my wife's favorite movie.
Mm-hmm.
She loves that movie. And but when you think about the predictive programming and the narrative, the something that I played, and you may have done this as well. I played that scene in ET where I was trying to get across that the mask don't work with COVID. And I played that
Yeah. And
scene.
when ET turns into a powdered donut and everybody's
Yeah.
putting
Or
the
no,
mask.
this was I'm sorry, I'm thinking uh Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I'm thinking of the mask scene
Oh,
with
okay.
Richard
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Dreyfuss. Everybody's walking around. What's going on? I don't know, but it's terrible.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Stand
When
in
they
the
say that
circle.
that there's been
Yeah,
a bio release
yeah.
to cover
Don't
up for the
go.
alien. Yeah.
Don't walk out of the circle. You can't come in here, sir. You can't come in here.
Yes.
And then he goes, screw this.
Yeah.
Everyone's like, you know,
And
and
it's a lie. Yeah, exactly.
yeah, and how I don't see how people didn't grasp it. What do you think if you had to, and this is another heavy question, but again, I want to have you back on. We could talk for hours, and I really want to have, I hope you'll come back on.
Sure.
We could crack certain books open, yours, we can crack other books, and I'm sure just in the next 24 hours, Biden's going to do something that'll
Crazy.
give us plenty to talk about. But what do you think is the biggest lie or misconception that the current population in this country needs to get beyond? Like what's that lever where, look, if you don't get beyond this and understand this is not real, you're never going to get to the next level. What do you think that is?
The biggest problem philosophically is what I said earlier, that many people are still trapped in a bubble of moral and epistemological relativism. They think that there's nothing true, whatever floats your boat, that we're not
Okay.
bound. There's no bound. I'm not bound by anything. I can determine truth from reality. If you never get past that stage one, out of coming out of that, you'll forever be a tool of the system. You'll be in double think forever. So that has to happen first, and then manifestations of that are things like the idea that we can, I can identify as a woman and be a woman.
Mhm.
The magical thinking that my mind just makes it real. I mean,
Right.
that's the root of this. And actually, some people actually have talked about this. They've even said that if you go back into postmodernism and early gender theory studies, they were actually talking about magical thinking and the idea that the mind could determine reality and make it so. So I think we have to get away from that. That's the number one chief delusion that people have. And that would then undercut all the rest of the delusions, because you have to have that fundamental delusion first. There's no truth before you can start to say, hey, wait a minute, maybe there's a truth higher than the state, the establishment, the system, the corporations. Maybe they're actually lying.
Yeah.
But to say that there's mass deception and mass lying presupposes that there is objective truth. So that's the thing that has to be hammered home.
And that's well put, and it fits the biggies. Like you look at the crisis, the climate crisis, which isn't
exactly.
a crisis. Carbon's not a threat.
Right.
We need it. We do better in warm conditions. We're not unreasonably warm right now. The Earth has been a hell of a lot
humans
hotter.
are not destroying the planet by existing and breathing. Yeah.
And that whole thing, and that also, but again, it goes back to what you said, that magical thinking that, Mother Earth isn't my mother. I have a mother.
Right.
We need to commune with the trees. No, we can grow trees over and over, and we can use the wood to build. We don't have to make love to the trees, although I'm sure there's people listening that maybe have. Because
I mean, all the earth worship stuff is they tie that into the latest push for veganism, for you're not going to eat meat. We've been talking about that on podcasts for many years, because I was seeing in the documents of the elites, they were talking long ago, decades ago, about how eventually they would have to ban meat because meat is so nutrient dense of a food.
Yes.
And so, this goes back to Plato's Republic, where Plato says, don't feed the slaves meat, give them grains, keep them docile, right?
I'm so glad you brought that up.
Meat diet is a huge vector point that's overlooked by a lot of people, but even Bertrand Russell, Charles Galton Darwin, they're in their writings on the technocratic system, they talk about attacking the diet.
Yeah, it's amazing that that you brought that up. And then when you look at, if you put next to that, the government, what they want to ban us from eating, but what we're allowed to continue to put in our body.
Right.
Like sugar.
Yes.
Alcohol. And then what do the Dems want to do? We want to legalize drugs. We don't want anybody thinking clearly. But we don't want you getting, meat. And the other thing, one of my pet peeves is how easy it is to supply a population with water. Especially if you're near the ocean, and no one does it. I mean, we're the wealthiest, most advanced country in the world, supposedly, and we can't get enough water to people in California. You live on the biggest supply of water on the earth. Just take the salt out of it. But no, they want to control it. They want to control the water.
Right.
They want to control the food, just like in Africa. They don't want Africans and third world countries and people trapped in famine. They don't want them having generators to pump water and diesel trucks to bring their crops to market. The people in charge would rather have the food rot, and then they can have great fundraisers and do things with the United Nations. So I'm starting a whole new show, and we need to wrap it up. But
we can talk about all food and control of resources and
oh my gosh,
intentional shortage and all that. That's a key elite strategy. Absolutely.
So what do you have coming up that you want to share with people, in addition to you're working on a third book? This is your second book. This is your first book. Your wife has two books. So
yeah, I've got I have a third book out called Essays on Theology and Philosophy. It's about a 600-page book of all of the things that I wrote over the last 10 years that aren't about movies. So everything non-movie is in a new book that you can get from the shop as well. I'm working on Esoteric Hollywood 3, so I got about 100 pages of that one written. Hopefully it's going to be better than even part 2. So I'm looking to really get deeper into a lot of the intelligence connections that I didn't go into in 1 and 2, and new things that I've read and learned about with the history of the OSS in Hollywood that I didn't cover in part 1 and part 2. So that'll be in part 3, probably in the next 6 months or year. Hopefully I can get it done by then. We've been doing a lot of live events, so we're probably going to have a live event in June again with Jamie Kennedy, the comedian from Scream. that will be in Vegas. I think we'll do that in June.
That's
I
cool.
host the Alex Jones show every Friday from 3 to 4 Eastern.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you when you fill in for Alex.
It's every Friday. I've been doing that for the last 3 years, so it's
Wow.
a lot of fun. Enjoy that quite a bit. And then I have my YouTube channel, so we do pretty much every 2 or 3 days. We do a new live stream, podcast, interview, debate, all kinds of stuff.
Excellent.
So that's
Excellent.
on my channel. Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter. I put a lot of stuff there. Follow me on Rockfin. Put a lot of stuff there. So I'm all over all the social medias if anybody wants to follow me.
So pretty much you just search Jay Dyer, you're going to come up with a lot of that stuff. And then your website is outstanding. I really enjoy your website too.
Thank you.
And
Yeah,
but tell me,
jaysanalysis.com.
yeah, what's it called again?
Jaysanalysis.com.
Yeah, jaysanalysis.com. Well, thank you again for coming on, sir. This has been a real, I love it. A great way to kick off the week.
Yeah, it was a great conversation, Ken. I really appreciate it.
And definitely want to have you back on and
Absolutely.
stay in the fight because I think we got to get more truth out.
Absolutely.